fortnight ago, we went through the first half of the Satipatthana Sutta, looking at mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of feelings. And then the other two foundations of mindfulness is Chittanupassana, mindfulness of the mind, and then Dhammanupassana, mindfulness of Dhammas. In the mindfulness of the body, Lord Buddha starts with the practice of breath meditation. The bhikkhu goes to the foot of a tree and breathing in, he knows the breath is long, or breathing in, he knows the breath is short. Essentially, he knows the quality of the breath. The word that is used is he understands, and everybody's probably going to have the different interpretation of what words they would use, and I would probably use the word he's cognizant of. Understanding seems like an intellectual concept that you have to understand. It's like you don't have to understand that you're standing. You're cognizant that you're standing. You're cognizant that you're sitting. You're cognizant that you're breathing in, and you're cognizant of the quality of the breath, whether it was long or short. But you're not trying to understand a riddle. And you're not commenting on everything. You're simply aware of it as it is in the moment, cognizant of it. And so the foundation of the body means knowing the body in the postures, and then knowing the nature of the body. So that becomes knowing the 32 parts, or knowing the elements, knowing what happens to the body after breath leaves the body, consciousness leaves the body, the charnel ground contemplation. So all of that fell into the mindfulness of the body. And then the mindfulness of the feelings, knowing when it's a pleasant feeling, a neutral feeling, an unpleasant feeling, and an exalted feeling, an illustrious feeling, and even what they call the otherworldly feeling. So that's all of the jhanas, or feelings associated with insights, etc. So the next one is mindfulness, contemplation of mind. And what's interesting is this just has 2 paragraphs, and Chittanupassana. But I'll read those paragraphs, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how I understand it or practice with it. And how, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mind as mind? Here a bhikkhu understands mind affected by lust is mind affected by lust. The mind affected by lust is the mind unaffected by lust as mind unaffected by lust. He understands mind affected by hate as mind affected by hate, and mind unaffected by hate as mind unaffected by hate. He understands mind affected by delusion as mind affected by delusion, and mind unaffected by delusion as mind unaffected by delusion. So these are the 3 root kilesas: lobha, dosa, moha. So it's knowing when the mind is affected by greed or lust, knowing when the mind is affected by hate. So that can be irritation, anger, aversion, and hate in the extreme, sensual craving, lust in the extreme. And he understands the mind is affected by delusion, a mind affected by delusion, and a mind unaffected by delusion as a mind unaffected by delusion. So this requires a lot of mindfulness, doesn't it? And I think what Thanajananand says, the best way to cultivate the 4 foundations of mindfulness is making awareness of the feelings in the body the foundation. That's the necessary foundation. The reason it's the necessary foundation is it's the thing that we can do consistently. So you can make awareness of your breath something that you do when you're sitting. You can make awareness of your footsteps something that you do when you're walking. You can make awareness of your postures something that you train in being consistently aware of. When you have that as the foundation, it's the quality of presence of mind, of clarity, of awareness that has become established that makes it possible to notice the mind is affected by lust, the mind is affected by aversion, the mind is affected by delusion or not affected by delusion. But if we simply try to notice the quality of the mind all the time, the problem with the mind is that delusion feeds delusion. We might start thinking, I'm going to contemplate my delusion, but at the end of the half an hour, where are you going to be? It's a very tricky thing to do. Mind is very fast. It has a lot of tricks. And so in being aware of an in-breath and being aware of an out-breath, one also notices what's the quality of the mind, what qualities are affecting the mind, while giving the interest and awareness to the breath. The thoughts and the emotions, the hindrances, the kilesas, they're all arising in the same space. And it's one of the things I love about the Anapanasati Sutta is, and I say this frequently, is that Lord Buddha says by practicing the breath meditation, Anapanasati, mindfulness of in and out breathing, one can fully cultivate the four foundations of mindfulness. Because the body is there, the feelings are there while you're sitting observing the breath. And while you're sitting observing the breath, you also notice the quality of your mind states with the clarity that arises. So he understands the mind is affected by delusion and the mind is as affected by delusion, and he understands the mind unaffected by delusion as the mind unaffected by delusion. He understands contracted mind as contracted mind, the distracted mind as distracted mind. He understands exalted mind as exalted mind and unexalted mind as unexalted mind. So once a practitioner starts to get the jhanas, they're going to be having very, very bright, boundless, profound mind states. And the practitioner has to be mindful of that also. He understands surpassed mind as surpassed mind and unsurpassed mind as unsurpassed mind. I think surpassed mind probably means liberated, and unsurpassed probably means unliberated. He understands concentrated mind as concentrated mind and unconcentrated mind as unconcentrated mind. He understands liberated mind as liberated mind and unliberated mind as unliberated mind. In this way, he abides contemplating mind as mind internally, or he abides contemplating mind as mind externally. So what does it mean to contemplate mind externally? I think this might mean aware of, simply as you are aware of your body as a body, feelings as feelings, mind states as mind states. The same truth is valid for other beings. So just as your body is a form, the person who walks in the room, there's another form. And just as your feelings are arising, staying for some time, ceasing, arising, staying for some time, ceasing, due to sense contact, that other conventional being that walked into the room is experiencing feelings, arising, staying for some time, ceasing, arising, staying for some time, ceasing. So externally, it's the same. One can be mindful. And what's interesting is when Tanajan Anan was contemplating awareness of the body, back at Wat Pah Pong when he was training with Luang Por Chah, when he got his bones, contemplation of bones stabilized in himself, he also noticed when he was in a state of, so when he's in a jhanic state, he might just be aware of his bones. But when he's in an upajjhara state, neighborhood concentration coming out of the absorption, but still aware of the bones, but not in a one-pointed way, in an almost one-pointed way, when other people walked in front of him, he saw their skeletons. He only saw their skeletons because the mind is mindful of bones as bones. So this is where I think this internally, mindful of forms as form internally and externally. Mindfulness, it's the same phenomenon in conventional reality. Conventionally my bones, conventionally her bones, but ultimately just bones. In this way, he abides contemplating mind as mind internally. He abides contemplating mind as mind externally. He abides contemplating mind as most mind, both internally and externally. Or else he abides contemplating in mind its nature of arising, or he abides contemplating in mind its nature of vanishing, or he abides contemplating in mind its nature of both arising and vanishing. So all of these mind states, illustrious or not illustrious, arising, staying for some time, ceasing. Or else mindfulness that there is mind is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge of and mindfulness, and he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a bhikkhu abides contemplating mind as mind. So I'm talking about that the other week, this wonderful sentence. Abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That's the result. It's not that you understand the practice, you understand the concept, and you can do that. You understand the practice, you understand the concept, you do it, you'll start experiencing that in moments and in periods. And it's just a wonderful positive affirmation that this practice will liberate the mind. It will get it to a state where it will abide independent, not clinging. In fact, if we were fully mindful of any one of these four foundations of mindfulness, they all end with this sentence. So, but the way Tanajan explains it, it's the same mindfulness in the space of this body and mind, right? But because we grasp at it as we project onto it a self, it's an assumption, a delusion. So when we have a closer look, well, what is a form really? Or what is a feeling really? Or what are these mind states really? What happens is that delusion falls away. We don't cling to this phenomena in the same way because it's not a self, it's a form, it's feelings, it's mind states. All of them arising due to previous conditions, staying for some time and ceasing. The contemplation of Dhammas, now that is many paragraphs. So I'll go through some of them. So the first is the 5 hindrances. How, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects? So Dhammanusati. I was talking with Tanajan about this the other day. It's like, in a way, everything is Dhamma. Everything is Dhamma. So the word Dhamma means nature, and there are unwholesome Dhammas, neutral Dhammas, and wholesome Dhammas. So Dhammanusati. But Tanajan explained that the Dhammanusati is, the way he explained it, it's like going from, it's like recognizing what dhammas are affecting your mind. So is it unwholesome? And then inclining the mind to pick up wholesome dhammas, because wholesome dhammas is what's going to make the mind ripe to have penetrative insight into ultimate dhamma and liberated state. So Dhammanusati is like the Chittanusati, recognizing the state of the mind. The Dhammanusati is which Dhamma is appropriate to apply in the process of training and cultivating and purifying my mind. So in this Dhammanusati section, that's where you have the 5 hindrances are mentioned. The bhikkhu knows if sensuality is present. The bhikkhu knows if aversion is present. The bhikkhu knows if sloth is present. The bhikkhu knows if anxiousness, worry is present, restlessness. The bhikkhu knows if doubt is present. Another way, 5 aggregates. Again, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu abides contemplating mind objects, in terms of the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. And how does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 5 aggregates affected by clinging? Here a bhikkhu understands such is material form, such is origin, such its disappearance, such is feeling, its origin, its disappearance, such is perception, its origin, its disappearance, such are formations, their origin, their disappearance, such is consciousness, its origin, its disappearance. In this way, he abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects, internally, externally. And that is how a bhikkhu abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases. So in a way, it's like here Lord Buddha is giving us the dhammas to contemplate, the ways to contemplate the mind and body in a way that will purify it of delusion. So, holy dhammas, contemplating the 6 sense bases. A bhikkhu abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 6 internal and external sense bases. And how does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 6 internal and external bases? Here a bhikkhu understands the I, he understands forms, he understands the fetter that arises dependent on both, and he also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandonment of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. So that's very interesting. Simply with the I consciousness, the abandoning of the fetter that I think Lord Buddha is referring to is the fetter of self-view. It's the first fetter that we abandon in experiencing stream entry. So what happens to the untrained mind in seeing a sight is there's a feeling of I'm seeing, and then there's a feeling of I like that, I don't like that, that's beautiful, that's ugly. So in the training of Dhamma Vipassana, realizing ultimate Dhamma, seeing the I as a sense base, seeing sense contact as sense contact, one has the insight, it's not self, it's not I, it's just sense spaces and sense contact, and the theta of self-view can fall away. So similarly, that's the same with the with sounds, with feelings, with tastes. In this way, he abides, contemplating mind objects as mind objects, internally, externally, both internally and externally, and he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world, having developed insight by being mindful of sense contact at sense bases. The 7 enlightenment factors. Again, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 7 enlightenment factors. How does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 7 enlightenment factors? Here, there being the mindfulness of enlightenment factors in him, a bhikkhu understands there is the mindfulness enlightenment factor in me, or there being no mindfulness enlightenment factor in me. He understands there is no mindfulness enlightenment factor in me. He also understands how there comes to be a rising of the unarisen mindfulness enlightenment factor, and how the arisen mindfulness enlightenment factor comes to fulfillment by development. So the enlightenment factors are mindfulness, sati, investigation into dhammas. This is the bojjhanga, bojjhango sati sankatto, dhammanang vichayo tata, virya, energy, piti, rapture, passaddhi, tranquility, concentration, samadhi, upekkha, equanimity. So, Lord, got to go through this for each of these. There being the investigation of states, enlightenment, investigation into Dhamma, bojjhango sati sankappo. There being the energy enlightenment factor in him, there being the rapture enlightenment factor in him, there being the tranquility enlightenment factor in him, there being the concentration enlightenment factor in him, there being the equanimity enlightenment factor in him. A bhikkhu understands there is the equanimity enlightenment factor in him, or there being no equanimity enlightenment factor, he understands there is no equanimity enlightenment factor in me. He also understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen equanimity enlightenment factor, and how the arisen equanimity enlightenment factor comes to fulfillment by development. So it's this training the mind with these lists of dhammas, or with knowing these qualities. So one trains in the way I was asking Tanajan, what's a simple, practical way to explain Dhamma, Nusati? And Tanajan said, so yeah, suppose you see something and lust arises. There's an attractive object and lust arises. And then one knows that the mind is affected by greed and craving. So that's the chittanupassana. Then the dhammanupassana is then knowing, well, I should contemplate the body as elements, or I should contemplate the body as parts. And then what happens is, in doing that, mindfulness and wisdom arise in the mind, and equanimity, and the mind becomes in a more balanced state. And then, various ways, this path of training, the eightfold path, there's the mindfulness plays an important role, and the kind of right thought, samma sankappo. There's in Thai forest tradition, in many of the Dhamma talks, the qualities that consistently come up is mindfulness with clear comprehension, wisdom, and samadhi. And they often kind of talk about the avidya tanha upadan as the problem, ignorance, craving, and grasping, and the remedy being sati, samadhi, panya, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And so it's this practice of, when we train in knowing our body postures, training the breath meditation, knowing what quality is affecting the mind, and that's the mindfulness and clear comprehension. And the way we learn about whether things are wholesome or unwholesome is through listening to Dhamma and reading Dhamma talks and practicing. we become familiar with. That's a wholesome mindset. That's an unwholesome mindset. That's a skillful way of thinking. That's an unskillful way of thinking. Many things that we have to do in tandem. We need to listen to Dhamma talks. We need to do some chanting. We need to do some meditation. And we need to keep applying our truth discerning awareness to know what is affecting the mind. And then with the Dhamma Nusati, it's applying wholesome lists of Dhammas and picking them up as our contemplations in ways that will purify the mind. Explaining the 7 factors of enlightenment, like knowing when mindfulness is present and knowing when it's not present, knowing what gave rise to a good quality of mindfulness and knowing what caused it to degenerate. This is the kind of thing we have to know. It's like, we can know that, oh, that was a good sit. There is a sense of clarity now. There's more presence of mind. Or you come and you sit next time, oh, my mind's all over the place. And it's like, well, what did I do? What have I been doing? And then we get more skilled at recognizing what is helpful in the process and what isn't helpful in the process. But as Tanajan and many of the forest masters, Ajahn and many of the forest masters stress, you can't go wrong if you do your sitting meditation and your walking meditation and your breath meditation as your base. Because what happens is that you become aware of the mind states. And you become familiar with the hindrances. You become familiar with your kilesas. And you learn to accept that what you need to do less of and what you need to do more of. You know your mind. And then it's a matter of applying the disciplines. For people who experience a lot of greed or lust, we have to do a lot of body contemplation, awareness of death. Similarly, for people with a lot of irritation and aversion, they have to do a lot of metta. But then they also have to cultivate awareness of the body, the nature of the body. Normally, in this day and age, that seems to be what leads to the first big liberating insights. So, understanding the nature of the body. People seem to get the vipassana insights often on retreats by awareness of the impermanence of feelings, arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing, 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 seeing that with clarity. But the deeper stages, like getting established in liberation, many people, it seems, have got that through really seeing the teeth as teeth or seeing the bones as bones with a stabilized mind. That seems to be where most of the identification of the body and mind as being a self is based on grasping at the body as a self. And when the mindfulness and concentration is clear enough to really see its elements, that self-view can fall away. The mind can pierce through the veil of delusion and experience a deeper reality. So, I hope that brief explanation of Cittanupassana and Dhammanupassana is helpful to you. And I wish you and I wish me continued success in developing insights for foundations of mindfulness. And I always like to just point back to that paragraph in the introduction of the Anapanasati Sutta. When we practice Anapanasati, the 4 foundations of mindfulness can be cultivated fully. In cultivating the 4 foundations of mindfulness fully, the 7 factors of enlightenment become developed. In developing the 7 factors of enlightenment, the mind is liberated. So breath meditation is a great thing. And then, of course, we need to try to maintain our awareness throughout the day, throughout our postures. Try not to do things which cause mindfulness to degenerate. Try to do things which support the strengthening of this quality of presence of mind and clarity. Hope something I said may have been helpful.